Hi, everyone. I'm Ekaterina Hertog. I'm an associate professor in AI and society here at the Oxford Internet Institute. To everyone online and in the room, welcome to the flexibility paradox, why flexible working leads to more work and what we should do about it. We're delighted to have here Professor Hee-Jung Chung. I hope I pronounced it well, thank you. With us today to discuss the question, does flexible working really provide a better work-life balance, enhance workers' well-being, and gender equality? Hee-Jung Chung is professor of sociology and social policy at the School of Social Policy, Sociology, and Social Research at the University of Kent. She is a comparative labor market and welfare state researcher interested in the future of work, workers' well-being, and gender equality. Her research aims to explore different new issues of inequality and social justice around work and labor markets and find policy solutions to tackle these problems. The presentation will run, just some admin points, the presentation will run for about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by a discussion at the end. If you are joining us online, please put your questions into the Q&A box or raise your hand if you wish to ask a question with your camera and microphone on. So then we will put you on and you'll be able to ask in person. Those in the room, please save your questions until the end and Hee-Jung will answer them after the talk. For your awareness, the event is being recorded and will be posted on our website following the event. It's great to have you here, Hee-Jung, and very much looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you everyone for having me, inviting me, and being here in your busy day schedules. And thank you for those of you online, which I can't see. But anyways, so I'm Hee-Jung, and this is the book. I should have brought copies of the book so I could circulate it so you could look at it, but my mind is a Swiss cheese right now, so I forgot. It's one of the many things I forgot today. But anyways, working from home, and I'd like to kind of start off with this has kind of been a autobiography in writing this book, and it's kind of this book is about you as well. A lot of you academics who have experienced this, how in theory or in the kind of public imaginary, working from home, it's this amazing thing. You get to be relaxed. You just kind of tumble out of bed and start working, and in a relaxed way, have a nice leisurely lunch, and then, maybe watch a little Netflix. There's a lot of kind of that idea behind it. But was it always like that? And is it really like that? Rather than me kind of blabbering on, I wanted to bring Trevor Noah in.
We all wished. How many people were rubbing that lamp at the beginning of 2020? Just wishing away like, oh, I wish I didn't have to go into the office every day. Oh. Your wish is granted. And you wished not to go into the office. You forgot to wish that the office wouldn't come into your house.
So this is actually something that we all experience. Those of you that's working, especially in knowledge work, working from home, is that, oh, it's amazing that I could just work from home. One of the things that we forgot about is that now work is everywhere. As everywhere you go, it could be done anywhere you go and every time, to the point where you kind of, those of us, which I mean me, you wake up checking your email, work email, and you go to bed checking your work email. And that's what the book is about. Oh yeah, the book looks like this. So you can search online and and take a look at it. So essentially, this is the flexibility paradox. The flexibility paradox is when workers gain more control, freedom over when and where you work. The assumption, especially if you talk to like economists and rational choice kind of theory people, then they would expect that, oh, they will extend their leisure. They would extend the what they want to do. But they actually end up working harder and longer. Where flexible working, rather than enabling workers to work anywhere and anytime they want, it ends up with workers working all the time and everywhere. Now, so the book is about flexible working and what happens if you give workers more control and freedom, if you want, in quotation marks, over work. But in actuality, what the book is really about, and I only realized this a year after its publication, is that it's actually a critical evaluation, not of flexible working in itself, but the way we think about work, our work culture, our gender culture, as well as parenting culture. And that's actually what the crux of this book and my thesis is about, so to say, of the book, is where flexible working cannot be seen on its own because it is so influenced by the context in which it is being used. And in a way, it is a mere amplifier. As kind of you said, the internet could be an amplifier. This is a mere amplifier of all the problems we have in today's society. Now, this is the kind of the chapters in the book, of which I'm going to kind of focus on the highlighted ones. And today's talk, what I really want to talk about, because I've been going around talking about this flexibility paradox, I've just kind of gotten a reputation of this person who hates flexible working. And I just decided, like, wait, I mean, I'm going to start off with talking about all the benefits of flexible working and home working, etc. Right? And then I'm going to talk about the big but, like not the big but, but not Sir Mix-a-Lot big but, but more however, and about the gender and flexibility paradox, why that happens, and also about flexibility stigma. And one of the things also I wanted to talk about was about how, again, because the book really was about a critical reflection about work culture and the way work is, what work is in today's society. Not all societies, but especially in societies like the UK and the US, how we should think about work in the future. Before I go on, I just want to clarify some terminology. So flexible working can mean a whole bunch of things. But in my book, I'm really talking about flexible schedules, so flexible starting and ending times of work, working time autonomy, which is kind of, you don't really have allocated very strict starting ending times. You just do the work. You have goals you need to meet and you do them when you need to. Teleworking is just the ability to work outside your normal office space or employer space. If you look at the proportion of workers who were working flexible schedules in 2015, unfortunately, we don't have data for like 2022 or 21, but in 2015, we see that approximately a quarter of Europeans across the 28 European member states then had access to flexible schedules. That number is about almost 30%, 1 out of 3 workers in the UK, and more than 50% in countries like Denmark and Sweden. And if you look at the proportion of people who are teleworking pre-pandemic, it depends on the definition of what is teleworking and how often you do it. But even if we count people who do it occasionally, so a couple of times a month, we're only talking about 1 out of 7, 1 out of 8 people, right? But post-pandemic, what we find is if you can include everyone, even those who only do it occasionally, more than half the population, employed population in the UK, are working some sort of teleworking. On the European average, it's approximately just over a third, so it's like 38%. And again, some of the countries like Sweden, Luxembourg, these numbers are half the population or above, right? Now, the benefits of it, and I don't really need to tell you this, but actually I will tell you this. So it took me, just as a mere example, I like talking about myself, I guess. So it took me 3 and a bit hours to get here, right? Like, I mean, obviously I don't work in Oxford. I work in Canterbury at the University of Kent. So I want to do this on a normal basis. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, I have a job here, but I can't move. It would take me 3 hours to get here. And actually there was train connection problems. So it took longer than 3 hours door to door, 3.5 hours, right? Like just that alone is enough to say, first of all, the amount of time you save, okay, you could work on the train, but come on, we were kidding. We can't work on the train as much as I could work like in office. The amount of stress induced because of it, the amount of time I need to spend preparing, oh, do I have everything? Do I have the cable? Do I have my phone? Do you have the chart? All of that. Essentially that, you're giving the gift of time, and time is limited. It's very, very limited, and people tend to forget about it. It's not expansive, that you only have I just forgot how many hours in a day, 24 hours in a day, and 7 days a week. So by allowing people to not having to do this horrible commute, you're giving them the gift of time. And that gives a hell of a lot of benefits in terms of well-being, work-life balance. And I'll show you later, it enhances the capacity to work, because there are certain people who don't have that time to spend on commuting. And I'll talk about that a bit later. There's environmental benefits. But another thing is about how teleworking essentially moves the workers away from the employer's kind of remit of power. Now that is changing because of surveillance systems as well as other things. Having said that, there are some benefits, even with the surveillance systems in place. There are lots of people who do talk about, especially with good managers, the ability to be autonomous as being one of the key benefits of teleworking. And again, this is depending on the organization as well as the managers. Now, a little bit about the whole work capacity enhancing elements of flexible working. So again, working from home, you cut down commuting times, but you could also blend activities. So you could do routine childcare. So you could have the kids somewhere running around as long as you don't care about them destroying the house and work. And you could also do flexi time tag parenting, which is tag team parenting is essentially where one person starts work early, ends work early, picks up the kids. One person starts work late, drops the kid off at some sort of childcare facility, picks them up, come back home later, which is, again, all these kind of positive elements of flexible working, and which is the exact same thing I'd use. This is my daughter when she was 6 months old, when she went to nursery, and she was still breastfeeding and she was still young, whatever. So I had to use flexible schedules and working from home in combination of blending and all sorts of things to go back to work full time. And again, because I was an academic, I always had that control over work. It didn't mean that I have to work in the evenings. It didn't mean that I had pretty much no free time, which we'll come back to, but it allowed me to go work full time. Now, if I had to go in the office 9 to 5 in a much more stringent manner, I would have dropped out of the labor market or worked part-time. And as many of you know, in countries like the UK, part-time work is the key route into a bad career. It is the number one reason why there is a gender pay gap, because part-time work is occupational downgrading. Now, I just wanted to see if this happened to other women, not just me. And that's actually what happened. So you see, this is using UK household panel data, where we followed individuals across time and see what happens when they have children. And surprisingly, people who don't have flexible schedules, more than half of the women, when they have a child, they reduce their working hours very significantly. So it's a really big problem in the UK. Having said that, those women who were able to work flexibly, that likelihood dropped by half. That's a huge gap in terms of supporting women's employment. We also found that first-time moms, so like women who gave the first births, they're much less likely to drop out of the labor market. Approximately 25% drop out of the labor market, but again, about half of them, like that reduces to about half. But also, and they're able to better engage at work. And you talk to women who are teleworking, how their ability to take part in meetings have increased because, again, you couldn't stay later, but then you can if it's online and the kid's somewhere else. It doesn't matter. I could do workshops, you could do meetings. So you were able to actually gain access to power through these kind of technologies, as well as being able to work from home. And this benefit isn't just for women or women with care responsibilities or workers with care responsibilities, but it's been found for disabled workers, Black and ethnic minority workers, which we used digital diaries to kind of track down how they felt about home working, and workers with any kind of responsibilities, including pet care. Like if you have a dog, it's really stressful and it's really hard to try to juggle everything. But when you're working from home, it's much easier. Yeah, so these are the benefits, right? It's like, yay, flexible working, yay. And then there's that but thing. Yeah, but why is it, with all these benefits, why are we working harder and longer? And again, why are we, as in you all as well? So Kelly and Anderson, in their 2010 article, which looks at UK organizations that use part-time work and teleworking, they talk about these three dynamics that you could think of. One is that, and this happens to academics, at least me, or yeah, anyways, it happens to all of us. So when you blur the boundaries of time, as an employer, you don't have to pay overtime premium, right? Because back in the days, if you're working past 6 o'clock, you have to pay them extra. Like not in this country, but in other countries where labor laws are human. But flexible working, like what is a working hour? You work a little bit longer, it becomes all blurry. So you're able to kind of add more work in. So your workloads increase through the back door. The social exchange theory is a bit different. As I said, flexible working was not as common, especially pre-pandemic. So it was seen as a gift. It's a work-life balance gift that you need to pay back. So, oh, you give me the gift of working from home, I'll have to repay back because again, if I'm saving 3 hours a day, not commuting, I'm going to give some of that back to you so that you don't take it away from me because it's a gift. It's a gift that could be taken away. So you have to reciprocate. Enabled intensification, essentially that when teleworkers, and part-time workers, you're not as fatigued because you're not commuting, you're not using a lot of energy on something stupid, which is commuting. So you're able to work better, but also you're able to kind of work when you're sick or, because when you're working from home, if you have a bit of sniffles, you could still work, whereas you wouldn't go into the office, especially if you need to commute like 2 hours, right? So that's the enabled intensification. And we just want to push that theory a little bit more, also kind of drawing from other scholars. I kind of felt like there's two dynamics in which this whole working longer and harder happens. There's two things where one is on one hand, the easier one is the flexibility stigma, because there's still stigmatized views around flexible workers. And I'll show you a whole, I collect, there's a scrapbook I have of a certain demographic, which you'll find out soon, where it's like, oh, flexible working is like, you're not working, you're just slackers, you're not productive, you're making work for other people, like a scrapbook. So if that a lot of people think that way, you have to work harder to compensate for that stigma or bias against you. Especially when you feel insecure in your employment and insecure in your kind of, not just, in your position, in your career perspective, but also employment as a whole in relation to the labor market. The second one is more, if you want, kind of that workaholic nature of it. When you blur the boundaries, you're much more likely to just keep working, just be like, I'll just do a little bit more. And it feels like it gives you an opportunity, if you want, to work harder and work all the time. So essentially, this first one is again, I said this is a book about the critical evaluation of our current work culture. And I'm not saying this is for all countries, which towards the end of the book, I really talk about in greater detail. But let's think about this society, the UK society, the US society, Korean society, which are the three countries I lived most of my life in. It's a country in these societies where you still have the hustle culture. You make it, or you snooze, you lose, that culture where enterprising oneself is in the very fabric of our nature in everything you do. So every decision you make is somehow related to how that's going to impact your labor market competition, as well as your future productivity. So it's like, why do you run? Oh, it makes me a better worker. Why do you do yoga? It's because, I'm sorry, like it helps me focus at work. Like there's a lot of that kind of talk about how, it's no longer just to exist in the society, that you only exist in the society as a worker, as someone who can generate monetary value to society. What that has done is, if you have internalized capitalism and the internalization of the ideal worker norm, where many workers, and this is not just professional workers, a lot of workers feel like you really, to be seen worthwhile, that you have to be fully committed and devoted to work. And to do that, you have to work long hours, etc. And you'd always be available. And you see this in society where the busyness at work is considered a badge of honor. And this is kind of coming from Time News Studies folks here. It's also considered as a confirmation of self-worth. So one of the funny kind of studies that come out is that you feel like you need to say, I'm busy, to make sure that other people don't think you're a loser, right? But if you don't think you're busy, you think you're a loser. Like that's the society that we're living in. And again, not necessarily all of us, but many of us. And the other thing is the reason also was because of this passion that we heard, like everybody is expected to have passion at work. Like, oh, we're supposed, and maybe not, the very older generation who were fortunate to have a bit more of a boundary there, but There's a passion that you have to have at work, and how, we don't pay musicians a lot of money because, oh, you do what you're like, you want to do. So why should you be remunerated? Now, the problem is that we use that kind of same sentiment for everything. And to be honest, even musicians, why should they not be paid? Like, because we are using passion a tool to extract labor from people and to extract value from people without actually properly and giving them payment. And this is, again, one of the reasons why flexibility then ends up with, let's say, self-exploitation. But it also isn't just that. It's not like people have just all became workaholics, which is a term I actually don't like because I think it's more structural than individual, kind of psychology based. Is that we've seen the demise of the welfare state. We've seen now full commodification of labor in this society, where back in the kind of post-war society, there was some sort of a social security net, whereas now the job guarantees and income protection have diminished. There's a high rise in insecurity of jobs insecurity, status insecurity, income insecurity. We have terms like workfare, where again, as a citizen, you need to enterprise yourself before you can rely on the state. And we have these kind of notions of benefit scroungers, where people who are on benefits are essentially scrounging away from the state. So this has led to a system of self-control where you have to enterprise yourself. Otherwise, the system will force you to, with conditionality, to force you to do that yourself, but also you have to, otherwise you won't be able to survive in the society. There was some, people talk about, how about like, okay, those are kind of on the bottom of the let's say labor market, or the more precarious side. But I feel like the precariousness of even like, so not just job and income, but also status precariousness has really come alive even on the top end, where I think there's been increase in competition. So essentially go to talk to a big name professor and be like, hey, how are you feeling? And they're feeling insecure as well, because there's an increased kind of monitoring and comparison of workers, again, with using kind of matrix guided self-evaluation and comparison. Not everybody, but there's still like an innate kind of sense of insecurity, and it comes out in forms such as the imposter syndrome, etc., where you feel like you have to keep going, otherwise you will kind of that the fall, there's nothing to cushion that fall if you do fall. So I go through this bit a bit quicker because I always run out of time. But this is a whole bunch of slides which shows you the empirical side of this. So there's a lot of quantitative studies that I've carried out using UK and a German household panel data, but also other colleagues have done experimental field studies, where essentially we see this happen in various ways. So flexible workers work longer overtime, longer unpaid overtime, and even routine workers who you think, oh, that might not happen very much. They also do have, like they work harder by taking fewer breaks and working longer. People who work flexibly are more likely to have the mental spillover. So you're thinking about work all the time, in addition to kind of doing work all the time. But one of the things you find is that there's a gender difference where women seem to do overtime less. They spend less time in paid or unpaid overtime when they work flexibly. And the reason for it, it's because women are busy enterprising the household as well as themselves. So if you go back to the Foucauldian idea of this whole Homo economicus, which is essentially neoliberalism, and the development of this notion of human capital. It's about how when you are developing the human capital, you don't do it just for yourself. Your household is an enterprise. So it's like, so I'm a representative from the Chung Roth dynasty or company, of which we have, I don't know, I think I'm the manager. I'm pretty sure I'm the manager. And then we have two employees, my partner and my daughter. We're trying to make sure her marketability is strong by making sure that she passes the Kent 11 test, la-di-da. But essentially what it is, so every interaction you do, as I said, everything we do is a part of our enterprising yourself. But then what you also do is every relationship I do is making sure she's enterprise so that she is competitive in future labor market. Now, this is more important than ever because I remember being at uni in the 1990s in Korea, by the way. I went to an Ivy League university, right? So I went to one of those universities, and Oxford is probably one of those. Like, you go to uni, you walk out, you get any job you want. You just get a job. You get it, like, people are just like, hey, come and work for us. Now, like, that never happens. Even at Yonsei University, you walk out, you can't get a job. It's really hard to get a job. I was one of the first kind of generations. I went to schools in the 90s. Was the first time where things got a bit like, it was a bit weird. But that's the labor market now. Like, it has become much more competitive. And with that, it came like this intensive parenting. It coincides also with this notion of child development and this whole, like, 90% of your child's brain is developed by the age of 5. So if you haven't parented properly, if that kid fucks up, that's on you. And you who? Not dads in heterosexual relationship. It's going to be the moms. It's like, oh my God, you didn't listen to Mozart when you had the baby in your tummy. That's the culture we're living in. This actually,
I shall leave the room at this point.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, any moms or like, because there was, and it's based on scientific studies that you do have to stimulate the child's brain, and the brains, get stimulated in a very nice way. And so you have to buy that shit and then put it around the child, because that stimulates the baby's child. Having said that, there was also another study that if you like swing the baby around, like, their brain develops better. I always want to say that because I think we did that a lot. And I think, like, if you drop the baby, maybe it's better. I don't know. I'm just hoping, because otherwise my daughter will not be able to go to these elite universities. But it's, again, there's this notion that as much as there's an ideal worker norm, and this is coming from Blair Roy and others, is this ideal mother norm that as a mom, you have to be, especially the higher educated moms, you have to be making sure your baby has all the right enrichment activities, the right play dates, the right nutrition, yada, yada, yada. And that's also part of this whole enterprising the family. What then happens with flexible working is when you give in that freedom, you're using all that freedom to try to maximize the amount of interaction with your child. So what you see is not so much for housework, but really for childcare, again and again in the US and in Germany and in the UK, we see that mothers are using home working to ensure the childcare activities. On one hand, because in countries like the UK and US, there's not a lot of good quality, cheap, accessible childcare, so you have to do it. So it's a financial reason. But on the other hand, it's a reason because they have to do it, because otherwise because mothers are always feeling guilty. And so you're using that flexibility to squeeze in as much labor as humanly possible in a day, because childcare is labor. It's just unpaid, and then paid labor. So what you're doing is you're actually doing more of paid labor. So you're not sacrificing that, but you're also not sacrificing your motherhood, which means that you're exploiting yourself to the max, which is seen with the decline of leisure time, etc. So this is kind of what the exploitation model is. It's that flexible working freed up human capital without disrupting what the labor market thinks of the worker, because we're still based on the 1950s male breadwinner model, where you assume the worker has someone at home who's doing all the reproductive work, right? We haven't changed that. Actually, if you look at a lot of literature in the US and UK, a lot of organizations, especially in the more lucrative organizations, work has become greedier. So they're asking more of workers, especially with digital technologies, that you're being asked to be connected all the time and be available for the company all the time. As at the same time, we're asking more from the mothers, especially parents, but mostly mothers. Like, you have to be doing much more. The 1970s, 60s housewives who were spending all their time on housework and childcare spend way less time than full-time working mothers who are spending time on enrichment care. That's the society we're living in, which then means flexible working. That freedom allows women to do all that and not disrupted about any ideas about who should do the care, because it's now women who are working flexibly are able to maintain that unequal division of household labor without making their male partners really pick up the work. But on top of that, there's another thing, is that flexible working, again, my little scrapbook of things. I'll let you guys read it, because and I forgot to put Jamie Dimon in, not James Solomon. They even have the same names. Oh yeah, this guy. So flexibility stigma is the popular notion that flexible workers are not as committed, motivated, and productive. They make more work for others, and it's actually fundamentally based on two things. One is the ideal worker norm. The ideal worker norm essentially is that someone, if you're really devoted, and it's, forget about worker as like academic. Think about like if you have an image of like, oh, real serious academics are really into like finding, I don't know, truth or solving a social justice issue. What do they look like? They probably don't look like me, but like whatever it is, it's like, oh yeah, this person like doesn't eat, like just like works all the time and like just sits in a dark room and is like a hermit, like don't even engage in the world. Like there's this kind of image we have, like, oh yeah, you have to sacrifice everything. The whole notion of sacrifice is actually the way in which we perform the devotion to something almost. This is why the whole good work-life balance it's seen as conflictual. I mean, not everyone, but I'm kind of being a bit more extreme here as being a good worker, because your sacrifice of your work-life balance is the way to show your devotion to work. And this is why the flexibility stigma occurs, because of the fact that the whole point of you using something to have a better work-life balance is antithetical to the ideas of productivity. And if you look at kind of across Europe, this is 2018, but I don't think much has changed. So about a third of the population believe that flexible working is perceived badly, or it ends up with negative career outcomes. And I think the reason why I say it hasn't changed much is that during the pandemic, because it was a legal provision by the government, home working was seen less, it was met with less stigma. But now we're seeing this happen, where people are now being asked to come back into the office at a much faster rate, and that there are bosses who are explicitly saying without evidence that, oh yeah, flexible working is the reason why our company is suffering, or flexible working is the reason why we're not seeing increase in productivity. Again, there's no evidence as to back them up, but there's so many CEOs that say this. Going back to the whole gender thing, is the question then arises, whose flexible working is going to be penalized more? Now, there's two theories behind it, where one is because women's work capacities, as well as disabled BAME workers' work capacities are already questioned, when managers cannot see them, they're going to be penalized more, right? The other one is that BAME, disabled, women with care responsive mothers' work capacity is so questioned already that you have nowhere to drop. It's like you're so down that line, there's nowhere to drop. Whereas dads, there is a peer, so there's more bias to be had, so to say, right? There's more penalization you could get from home working. And the evidence is mixed. What you can still say is that there is definitely bias against mothers when everybody's working in the office, and that seems to kind of balance out if everybody's working from home. Who's in the very bottom is still a bit, complex, because there's different evidence on different sides. And the last point I wanted to make was about context. Oh, actually, that's not the last one. There's the second to last question was about a point I wanted to make about context. The thinking about stigma just alone, it's that this is not really, again, based on real evidence. The CEOs are not actually saying things that are based on evidence, as like flexible workers are being like lazy or they're not being productive. Obviously, there are cases where that happens, but it's not really the truth. It's not based on the empirical evidence, but it's most on the social norms. I mean, this is not just because I'm a sociologist, probably is, but it's essentially, it's about the norms that we introduce flexible working shapes how it's, how the results come out. So of course, different factors make a difference. So one of the most important thing, again, is the way we think about work, the centrality of it, and the kind of the way we think about long hours work is really at the heart of many of the problems that I just talked about, as well as gender roles, which again is really connected to the ideal worker norm, because the ideal worker norm is it's innately hegemonic masculine, right? Because who can spend all the time working? Like if you think about that, there's a very clear question answer to it. So what do we need to do next? So there's a couple of things. This is you work-life balance thing, but I'm not sure if anyone's interested, so I'm just going to move to the second thing. I think the right to disconnect, and this is something I would love to have a conversation with people here, especially on, is about the right to disconnect. I think helps, because the right to disconnect is like, it doesn't stop workers from working later, but I think essentially it's not because it's stopping employers from doing things, which is important, because stopping employers from doing things about labor law. I'm not a legal scholar, but I've worked with them a lot, and it's not a worker justice, social justice issue. It's about making employers understand how to use workers better. The reason why we legislate these overtime legislation is not necessarily because we don't want exploitation of workers, but it's also the cost of exploiting those workers in those ways for the society, for the company itself is really large. But sometimes companies can't see that because they're short-sighted. So they would misuse workers. And right to disconnect is almost the same thing. It's essentially saying that providing workers the right to time and right to rest is crucial if you want to have a productive workforce. And it's, again, hard for employers to understand this. So in a way, you're providing those mechanisms to nudge employers in the right way, as well as workers, so that this hyper-competitive flinging emails at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning doesn't happen, because there is a real risk in terms of those cultures being it is already developed. So in a way, we're kind of late to the party. But the good news is I'm pretty sure the commission is going to pass this, but hey, Brexit, so we're not going to benefit from it. But this is what I really like to talk about. So again, this is an evaluation, a critical evaluation of the problems of our work society. And again, one of the major problems of this was about this ideal worker norm and the way we think about work. And how and why are we still based on this 1950s man with a female, 1950s middle-class white man with a female partner who carries out all the reproductive work? Like, we need to change work and the standard worker. So to do that, I think that one of the things is that the new worker is someone who has a multitude of responsibilities and needs to juggle it. And only through that, and I think this is the key message, especially for if this is like HR or like CEOs and things, that how being able to juggle all of those things and being able to balance it actually makes the worker much more of a good worker who could actually provide much more creative thinking and solutions. And I think that is something that we really need to do. And one way of doing that, and again, this is just one simple way of doing it, is I think this whole idea of the 4-day week. There's a business case to it. There's issues around social inequalities that it addresses, issues with social cohesion and well-being. But I think one of the most important thing I like to think about when we're thinking about the 4-day week, rather than the business case, or it could be productive, is to change the notion of the standard worker by someone who has no other responsibility outside of work to someone who has lots of responsibilities outside of work. And with that also being by able to spend more time outside of work, I'm hoping that there could be some sort of recalibration of social value in terms of the more time we spend in non-remunerated kind of activities, how we can then think about value and the focus of our lives that could actually, be, sustainable in terms of many different ways. And again, that's kind of like some of the thinking that I've been doing recently about how we need to rethink work, and how work, kind of going back to the Beveridge report or the post-war welfare state, where again, can we have full employment models as a social right, employment as a social right with the decommodification? as a way of thinking about work, and how does that need to look like, especially in the age of AI and automation, where if not jobs are disappearing, the larger pockets of our work will be gone, or will be kind of done by our AI overlords. And then we have to then think about, then where should the money be? Because currently it's the people who are developing the AI that will be trickling into those, they will be getting the monetary profits out of it. Then what happens to human labor? How are we going to think about human labor? And again, it talks about really thinking about like citizenship rights and human rights, and what does it mean to be human, and how much can we it becomes too philosophical, so let's just stop there. So anyways, these are some of the key things I want to say, but essentially kind of, again, flexible working is a great enabler, but it's an amplifier. So without touching upon and really radically kind of changing some of these problematic natures of our work-life balance cultures, as well as gender cultures, we're not going to see very good outcomes. And more specifically on the gender inequality aspect, what you're seeing is with the return to work call from employers, you see that able-bodied white men are going back into the office. And what we're going to then see is a much more exacerbation of inequality patterns in society, unless we do something about it. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you very much. So I can keep an eye on the questions coming from online, and we'll try to alternate. So
yeah.
So do we have any questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very inspiring talk about flexible working. I just have actually two questions.
Yeah.
Firstly, regarding to the definition of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you mentioned something about flexing working hours. So,
Mm-hmm.
but also, I don't know if I missed this, but I think definition of work also matters a lot in this.
Mm-hmm.
So if we talk about flexibility with, so flexibility, time is flexible, but actually task is not. So task is our work. We have deadline, we have to deliver some results. So my understanding is like, it will be not that troublesome or problematic if we can do, a fixed amount of work, but we can distribute in flexible times.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what's the conceptualization of flexibility paradox in this book?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, it's about the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
I found this quite inspiring because when you say sacrifice, maybe that example is kind of extreme, but we try to prove we are good workers by
Mm-hmm.
saying we sacrifice a lot, we work
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not always the case. We define good workers by their results. If you achieve a lot, write 2 books within first year of academic career, that would be a lot, right? Even though you spend a lot of time just chilling, then I guess that's much more better than to define a scholar who always work there, sitting there and just do works. So in that sense, so I'm kind of just wondering, when you talk about stigma,
Mm-hmm.
what's the research methods? Did you do the interview, or how did the stigma come from? So yeah, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you want to? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take,
So with the flexibility, this is about the time and space of work. So there's, as you said, it could be the order of work, the task of work, the amount of work, and there's in colleagues such as Masmanian and all, what they talk about is in certain contexts, and actually Pongratz and Ons also talks about it in the German context as well, that a lot of this flexible working comes with the probably inflexibility of other elements of work, including that the employers, again, coming from the, enforced intensification of work, that they've added more work to it through the back door while giving workers this flexibility at work. So there is this kind of, in the kind of flexibility control paradox, as they say, that there's actually other elements of control that came in, or other elements of added work that came in with this flexibility. But the more precise definition I use here is about just the starting point, just the flexibility in the time when you do the work and where you do the work. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the second thing is about the stigma of the results. So that's an interesting point. So academia, in a way, in an ideal, very kind of, what do you call it? Abstract way. No, that's like in the vacuum. Oh, yes. In a vacuum, academia could be a really good aspect of work where you're only measured by performance in terms of how many journal articles did you publish, how many grants did you get, right? Now, that's in the vacuum, right? If you actually talk to people and in organizations as well. So in organizations, it's not as clear cut in terms of these clear outputs. So it's much harder to say, I could just do whatever I want, because that's not how it works, especially in promotion and career advances. There's a thing where face time is really important when you get promotion. But it's also in academia as well, because so many people are asked to do certain types of jobs, like service jobs. So we call it internal, external service jobs. So it's like, oh, can you sit in this promotion panel? Can you do this student engagement thing? La-di-da-di-da. And how many of us could actually just do that, just focus on output driven things? Not very. That's a very, very privileged position to be in, or a very good organization that is allowed and able to distribute these things well. But essentially, in most cases, unless, again, there are really good organizations which are able to do this well and really able to give people not only the freedom to do their work whenever and wherever they want, but also really be able to really get down to the very key outcomes, and they are evaluated appropriately. But the reality of it is that that's not how it's usually used.
Can I?
Very, very brief,
Very
so
brief.
because we have.
Yeah, sorry, because I also work in academia industry. I think in industry, I have very opposite feelings, because industry, they make them more measurable because we have to pay. So like KPI, a lot of metrics to measure people's outcome. And on the opposite side, in academia, we say we publish papers, but each paper is more vague than the KPI stuff we use in industry.
Yeah, I think it depends. As I said, it really depends on the organization and the group you're in. But I think that this whole, like, yeah, everybody's being kind of evaluated by the output they produce. Not really, no.
Okay, go ahead. Grant?
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation that opens up all kinds of interesting topics. And I'm just going to comment on one out of many possibilities. I've always been very uncomfortable with the theories of employment, and I think they have not really advanced very far since Marx. You know, everyone, workers of the world are all in chains everywhere. And there's a whiff throughout all of those theories in that slide you presented, where you had the three theories, and the following slide as well, where everyone is sort of being forced to work, and that they have to do this. They're compelled to be a part of this labor force environment. I think there's an alternative perspective on this, and in the spirit of your presentation, which was large parts of which were biographical, I'll tell you a piece of my biography, which is, for many years I was a consultant, and I would spend my leisure hours after consulting reading communications of the ACM and the American Journal of Sociology, because that was fun. And I didn't have to be forced to do this. I didn't have to be forced to read sociology articles or communications, computing material. And I learned computing languages because they were fun. And so I guess the broader point here is that, the job I have right now, and don't tell the university, but I would do this for free by and large, because I feel like I'm having fun, and I enjoy writing papers. I enjoy the interaction with people. I enjoy, conferences. They're not all parts of it that I enjoy. I wouldn't mark papers for free. For example, I think the marking boycott was a piece of genius, because no one likes marking, and so people didn't have to mark. I wouldn't go to research committee meetings without being paid, but there are large parts of the job that I really do like. And I think there's a component of this that, the fact that I have the freedom to work extra hours is not a bad thing from my point of view. That is literally a freedom.
Yeah. Okay. So this is called the passion exploitation model, right? So essentially the idea is that
I don't like the word passion, but that's.
yeah, but it's, you have to use something like your job exploitation model. And this is kind of something that I think it's been happening more recently, and I think this is a cultural shift that we see, where if you look at the 1950s, and even if you look at the international kind of social survey kind of programs, like these questions around, oh, I would work without the money, you know, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So ironically, so pay in a way, like kind of wage levels of workers have declined, and then there's high levels of inequality, but on the average, wage levels have declined, where you should really work because otherwise you can't really survive in this world. At the same time, there's more people, and again, not just in the very high professional jobs like consultants and academics, but in lower paid routine jobs where like passion or like you really love the job, like kind of is very embedded in our society. And if you look at especially younger generations, that's very much in it, and in a good and bad way. But I think that is a problem. So people are like, oh yeah, for example, with the flexible working and working long hours, why is that a problem? I love doing that. But so, and this is the false where you whip out the false consciousness argument, going back to Marx, and we never really progressed since then. But anyways, the notions of that is it really you? Do you really love it, or do you really love it because you feel like that's the way in which you evaluate yourself as being a worthwhile human being in this world? And that's how you've been, like, in the whole surrounding culture that we live in. That is the only way in which, and it would be the same thing for me too. It's like, oh yeah, I love doing this, I would love to just keep going, but you know, it's essentially taking a step back, and it's like, what are you sacrificing for it? But the other thing is, by doing that, let's say, just for the sake of argument, you don't get burnt out, you have no other things that you like to do in terms of, like, let's say, you know, family or socializing or hobbies, etc. Let's just say that's all great, but then it's also, it's like, what are we making people do? Because I think what's happening is we are under this false idea that we love it, whatever, and then we are kind of creating this kind of incredibly exclusionary type of labor market, which would not allow for people who don't feel the same way to take part in it. And I think academia is a really good example of that, because we love our jobs. Like, I don't work, it's like, if you love your job, you know, what was it? So you're not, if you love there's this, it's in the book, I didn't bring it, I can't recite it to you, but like,
Work to work or work to live.
No, if you love your job, you don't work a day in your life because, like, this is what I love to do. It's a false consciousness, like yeah. Yeah.
So completely, I will then have to take we have one question online,
Okay.
and then move back to the room.
Okay.
I really love the talk and I love your work, so thank you so much. And kind of a similar question to Grant, I suppose, like, you suggest as a solution to addressing these challenges around the flexibility paradox, policy changes and kind of structural changes, 4-day week and the right to disconnect. But how does that then address our false consciousness, so to speak, or our tendency to self-exploit? Who's to say we're not just going to use the 5th day of the week to work overtime or to I don't know,
Get a second job.
exactly. I suppose off the back of that, and this might be a big question, what does a non-exploitative world of work and parenting look like to you?
Oh God, yeah.
I know that's a big question, but thank you.
I'll have to be the next Marx then. God. So the thing is, I have this, and this is what I wanted to do. So of the 100 things I want to do, one of the things I want to do, and I think we've already seen a bit of sign of this, is that people who work 4 days a week, so you're like, oh, but they'll just work the 5th day, or they'll just, you know, be doing, so there's a lot of speculations. What really happens? So we have a lot of evidence that, like, they're more productive, there's more well-being, there's more like blah, 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 blah. I genuinely think that once you shift that notion of work, like, people start thinking differently, because you see a little bit about that when we got a lot of dads to stay at home during the pandemic because they were working from home. Now, did they share housework equally? Hell no, they didn't. But did they change their mind about what housework and childcare is? Yes. Did it change the way they want their preferences in the way they want to lead their life in the future? Yes. So what I'm trying to say is the reason why we love work so much, and I'm the same, because that's kind of what we were giving, that we were spending all our time in it. If that's all, especially when we were working in the office, that was our whole world. Of course we want to be in it all the time. Once we started kind of coming out of it, then we're like, oh my God, that was Stockholm syndrome. Like, okay, actually there's other things in life that I really want to spend my time with. And actually, I realized, and this is what I actually do see in some of the kind of more qualitative interviews with people who've moved into 4 days or worked fewer hours, is that their priorities change. So, oh, wait, maybe I don't want to buy the next Range Rover, right? Land Rover, I meant. Or was it? I don't know. Anyways, maybe I want to actually work less and spend more time with my kid, because after I'm spending time with my kid, he's an idiot, but he's a lovely idiot. I want to spend more time. Like, that's kind of what so we don't have evidence of that, only because I failed to put those questions into the trials. It's another long story. Anyways. But yeah, so I do, that's one of the reasons. It's a hypothesis that needs to be tested. What's the ideal form of kind of non-exploitative? I think it's really hard to say, because I think it's really hard if we were in such a thing. But having said that, there are cross-national variations in which the work cultures and gender cultures are. I'm not saying Denmark is amazing, but it's still much better than here. And the way people think about work, I lived in the Netherlands, I lived in Korea, and I could tell you those capitalisms are not the same capitalisms, right? You will have and you will see those barriers. And are they non-exploitative? Are they less exploitative? Yes. So yeah, so that's kind of my answer there.
So we have quite a long question online, so I'm going to try to do it justice by reading it artistically.
I'll just read it with you as well.
Okay, so it's from Maria. The office that I'm working at is doing a project on work, identity, and living a meaningful life. And I think an important thesis for this project is to view people as human beings who have inherent worth, who do not have to feel like our existence worth needs to be justified through our material contributions to the world, and that actually love, acceptance, and community comes first without prerequisite, and that strong foundation leads to meaningful contributions to work and society, not the other way around as it is now. What do you make of this analysis?
That is very good. I think exactly that's kind of what I want to, yeah. That was
looks
what
like an interesting project to look at.
Yeah, and I think again that kind of comes into the what's non-exploitative work. What do we expect from 4 Day week? It's just essentially that we need to change our value in terms of not just for ourselves, but in society in terms of what is valuable, as a group.
Okay,
so we're not judged by the number of articles and books that we publish.
We haven't had it so far.
Long way to go.
We are at 2:00, so I know we still have 2 questions in the audience, but I'm sort of always torn about workloads of everyone. Are we up for taking 2 quick questions still?
Yeah.
If people need to be somewhere else, you can go.
Yeah, we won't be offended, or I won't be offended at least.
So Blue and
yeah, I was just wondering.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you were considering working flexible hours still a privilege, because a lot of people cannot decide to do that, especially like, I don't know, people working in supermarkets, for example.
Yeah. So it is like, or working from home, it is a privilege, which this is one of the reasons why people work longer and harder when they do it, because they feel like, oh, I have all this privilege, so I should kind of reciprocate, etc. Having said that, so flexible working isn't just that. So you talk about flexible definition. So in a way, like actually flexible working in the way that I like to see it is used in the right way, is about trying to adapt to the kind of demands of the worker as well as the company, and to try to facilitate those 2 demands in a way that works best, with an understanding that workers actually know themselves how to work, utilize their labor most. I mean, it does kind of go into the self-exploitation, but putting that aside a bit, using kind of that kind of definition, what you do find in other more welfare states is that there are worker organizations that set up various forms of flexible working, which isn't just for strict kind of flexi time or teleworking. So you have factories that will go into kind of flexible schedules, but not in the more traditional sense, but different types of kind of rota self-roastering where it fits with the workers' demands as well as the company demands without sacrificing, actually improving performance outcomes. So it is a privilege now, but it doesn't have to be, kind of is what I wanted to say. And Lou, last but not least.
I had two questions. One was, would you also consider like platform workers, like, I don't know, like people who like order food, who like deliver food or something as flexible workers? I like those people included in all those studies, or is it more traditionally just people who work on their like laptops or something?
Well, this is anyone who has flexible schedules and like be able to work from home. Now with platform workers, because they're currently categorized as kind of self-employed, like, you know, well, they're bogus self-employed, but they are kind of self-employed workers. So they are out of, because it has to be employed workers in the data, in the quantitative data at least. What I can say is that platform workers a lot of times is seen as flexible workers in terms of more precarious contracts as well as kind of precarious employment status, because again, you're self-contracted work. But also there's this element of, well, whether platform workers, especially those who are doing those kind of like Deliveroo's and that kind of things, whether it's the flexibility in their job is the kind of the draw into those jobs, which a lot of people actually say is because they have that ability, they want that ability to be able to kind of facilitate other demands in their life with work, which then kind of points to a question of why, like, what is wrong with our labor market that doesn't provide enough of those flexibilities in other ways that they have to go end up doing that, right? So it is really linked in terms of where that demand comes from and how the labor market is unable to meet those demands, forcing people into very exploitative jobs at the moment.
Yeah, my second question was like,
Oh yeah,
with respect to like flexible work or generally work, like many studies, at least those that I have read, just show that people are productive, whatever, just a few hours a day, like 3 or 4 or 2, whatever out of 8, like whatever study you quote.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that was also measured and like how with like flexible work, and if you do overwork, like how does that like affect each other? Because if I look at myself and I'm at home, I feel like I'm probably not as productive for the same amount of time as I'm in the office, even if I'm literally at my desk, because in the back of my mind is, oh my God, yeah, I put something in the wash. Oh, there's the cat. Oh, you know, like.
I think, but there's an interesting question. So there's a study again, someone did a kind of a time use type of study on the like workers and what do you do at work? And then it's like a lot. Okay, so the one thing is, so working hours becomes a bit complex when you're working from home. And there again, this is a flexibility stigma, by the way, that your perception that you're not productive when you're working from home, because I think even in the, again, false consciousness or whatever, like that there is a psychological element that because you're at home, that your hours currently are blurred or mixed and that you're not productive. And it's even whether or not it's true, it might be true, it might not be, but it feels like that. And a lot of people have the same feeling. And that's one of the reasons also why they work more, because they're like, oh, I have to make up for it. Whereas if you look into the office space, and I realized this once, you know, I've been doing that hybrid thing, is that a lot of our time in the office is really wasted time, but in the more of a traditional sense, right? You're talking to colleagues, or you're just kind of like, you know, people take off on Facebook a lot as well, you know, like, or on the news, or, you know, like, people are not necessarily productive. There's the point where there's like 3 hours of the day is the only time, you know, they're really doing work. Having said that, I've kind of come around to it where okay, so I'm going to do two things. And this is more like, here, I'm a self-help guru, listen to me. One of the things that office space is really good at is like Katja and I like had lunch and we're talking about different things. It wasn't all work things. So is that work or not work? It could totally be work, because a lot of the things that we talked about could influence what I think about, but also even if it doesn't, we're not working in the same institution, but let's say we did, it bonded us together. So whatever problem solving we have to do together in the future, because I know her and I know she has kids and, you know, all these troubles that she has, we will be able to do it better. So a lot of talking about other things with your colleagues and bonding is such a crucial element of an organization that previously we didn't think about because it just happened. It almost happened just naturally. Whereas now with the whole home and hybrid work, and that's one of the first things that go, because when people have a different notion of productivity and now they're like work, right? And they're meeting. And actually, that's one of the biggest things that we need to bring back. It's like colleagues coming together and wasting a lot of time is what we really need in many organizations to actually have a strong bond and be able to do good problem solving together. But the other way, so you were saying, oh yeah, my cat, my whatever, right? Like, and that's true. Like, oh, we have to put the washing in, put the, you know, the robot vacuum cleaner on, whatever. And it feels really disruptive in some cases. But having said that, you could turn it around a bit. It's like, if you didn't do that then, and if you were in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and then you came home exhausted, whatever, what you would have is that you wouldn't have ample rest in the evenings every day, or you wouldn't have ample rest during the weekends, and you would be exhausted the next morning going into your office, right? So this whole notion of productivity becomes a really complex issue when you think about all of this. And is it really productive? It's hard. And you say, oh, there's very clear cut. Like, it's productivity is never a clear cut thing, because I wrote 10 articles. They were all shit articles, right? Like, you know, it's like, it's hard, right? So yeah. So this is why maybe even that isn't necessarily the right index to use with all this debates. And we're talking about social costs and social value as well. But that's another talk, you know, so we'll do that next.
I love this end point. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
So coming out, what did you learn?
Yeah.
It's really complicated. Thank you very much.
Work that out.